A young girl in tattered clothes stands before towering iron gates, her small hands trembling as she clutches a worn leather satchel. Behind those gates lies a mansion that will change everything. But what you're about to witness isn't just a story of survival. It's a tale that will restore your faith in destiny, justice, and incredible power hidden within the most unlikely people, Asterisk. Asterisk, the girl, unconsciously touches a small birthmark on her shoulder, shaped like a crown. She has no idea that this tiny mark will soon shake an entire kingdom. Are you ready for a transformation so shocking, so inspiring, that you'll never look at anyone the same way again? Asterisk. Let's begin. The rooster's crow pierced the morning silence, but 16-year-old Amara was already awake. She had learned long ago that sleeping past dawn only brought more pain. Her thin frame moved silently through the cramped cottage, her bare feet navigating the creaking floorboards with practiced precision. "Girl, where's my breakfast?" The harsh voice of Aunt Beatrice cut through the air like a whip. Amara's shoulders tensed, but she continued stirring the porridge over the small fire. "Coming, Aunt Beatrice," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Beatrice emerged from her bedroom, her gray hair wild from sleep, her eyes already blazing with irritation. At 52, she had the kind of permanent scowl that spoke of years spent finding fault with the world. She'd taken Amara in 3 years ago, not out of love, but because the small inheritance that came with guardianship helped pay for her drinking and gambling habits. "This porridge is thin as water," Beatrice snarled, though she hadn't even tasted it yet. "What kind of useless creature are you?" Amara kept her eyes down. "I'm sorry. There wasn't much grain left. Don't make excuses." Beatrice's hand struck Amara's cheek with a sharp crack. "A worthless orphan like you should be grateful for any roof over your head." The sting brought tears to Amara's eyes, but she blinked them away. Crying only made things worse. Instead, she touched the small locket hidden beneath her worn dress, the only thing she had left of her mother. Sometimes, late at night, she would open it and stare at the faded photograph inside, a beautiful woman with kind eyes and an elaborate crown. Amara had always assumed it was just costume jewelry, perhaps from a play her mother had been in, but something about that woman's face gave her strength, made her believe that kindness still existed somewhere in the world. "After you clean the dishes, you'll scrub the floors, tend the garden, and mend my dress," Beatrice continued, settling into her chair with a grunt. "And if I find even one speck of dust anywhere, you'll sleep outside tonight." "Yes, Aunt Beatrice." As Amara worked, she daydreamed of escape, not just from this house, but from this life of endless servitude. She had taught herself to read using old newspapers, had memorized every book she could find, and somehow knew she was meant for something more. But what could an orphan girl with no money, no family, and no prospects possibly become? The village of Millbrook was small and poor, where everyone struggled to survive. Amara had no friends. Beatrice made sure of that, claiming the girl was too worthless to associate with decent people. The other villagers either pitied her silently or ignored her completely, too focused on their own hardships to intervene. But today would be different. Today, everything would change. That evening, Beatrice stumbled home reeking of ale and desperation. She'd lost again, lost big. The gambling debts had piled so high that even her creditors were getting nervous. "Pack your things," she slurred, leaning against the doorframe. Amara looked up from her mending. "What?" "You heard me. You're leaving tomorrow." "Where am I going?" Amara's heart began to race. "Somewhere you'll finally be useful." Beatrice's laugh was cold and bitter. "There's a wealthy old man in the next county. Lost his wife recently. Needs someone to keep house and keep him company. He's willing to pay handsomely for the right girl." The blood drained from Amara's face. "You're selling me?" "Don't be so dramatic. I'm arranging employment. You should thank me." "I won't go," Amara whispered. Then louder, "I won't go." Beatrice's eyes flashed dangerously. "You'll go, or I'll have you thrown in the workhouse. At least this way, you might eat regularly." That night, Amara lay in her attic room, staring at the ceiling and fighting back tears. She opened her locket and studied her mother's face in the moonlight. "I don't know who you were," she whispered to the photograph, "but I promise I won't give up I'll find a way to honor your memory. Somehow. She had no idea how prophetic those words would prove to be. The journey to Ravenscroft Manor took most of the day. Beatrice had lied shamelessly to Mr. Hawthorne during their correspondence, describing Amara as willing and experienced in household management. She'd said nothing about the girl's true age, her education, or the years of abuse she'd endured. As their carriage approached the estate, Amara's breath caught. The mansion was enormous, with ivy-covered walls and tall windows that seemed to watch their approach. Gardens stretched in every direction, meticulously maintained and bursting with flowers she'd never seen before. "Remember," Beatrice hissed as they climbed the front steps, "you're grateful for this opportunity. Don't embarrass me." The door opened before they could knock. An elderly man stood there, tall and distinguished despite his 70 years. His silver hair was neatly combed, his clothes expensive but simple. But it was his eyes that caught Amara's attention. They were sad, deeply sad, but not unkind. "Mr. Hawthorne," Beatrice said, her voice suddenly sweet as honey. "May I present my niece, Amara?" Mr. Hawthorne studied Amara carefully, and she saw his expression shift from expectation to concern. Whatever he'd been told about her, the reality was clearly different. "She seems very young," he said carefully. "Oh, she's quite mature for her age," Beatrice lied smoothly. "Capable and hard-working. You'll find her most satisfactory." Mr. Hawthorne's jaw tightened slightly, but he nodded. "Very well. The arrangements we discussed." Money changed hands quickly, and suddenly Beatrice was gone, leaving Amara standing alone in the grand foyer with a man she'd never met. She waited for him to give her orders, to tell her where the servants' quarters were, to begin her new life of servitude. Instead, he sighed deeply. "My dear child," he said gently, "I fear we've both been deceived." Over the following weeks, Amara discovered that Mr. Edmund Hawthorne was nothing like what she'd expected. He didn't treat her as a servant, but rather as a guest who happened to help around the house. He insisted she take meals with him, gave her a beautiful bedroom in the main house, and most surprisingly of all, encouraged her to use his extensive library. "You read quite well for someone with limited education," he observed one evening, finding her absorbed in a book of poetry. "I taught myself," Amara admitted shyly. "I've always loved stories." "Then you shall have all the stories you desire. Knowledge is the greatest treasure I can offer." Slowly, Amara began to bloom. Proper nutrition filled out her thin frame. New clothes gave her confidence, and Edmund's genuine kindness healed wounds she didn't even know she carried. But she was careful not to grow too comfortable. Good things never lasted in her experience. Edmund, meanwhile, was fighting his own demons. He'd lost his beloved daughter Margaret in a riding accident 5 years earlier, and his wife Elizabeth had died of grief shortly after. The loneliness had been eating him alive when Beatrice's letter arrived, promising companionship. He'd expected a mature woman, not a traumatized child who clearly needed protection rather than employment. But something about Amara reminded him of Margaret, not just her age, but her spirit, her hunger for learning, her innate grace despite her circumstances. One evening, as they sat by the fire, Amara unconsciously touched her locket. "That's a beautiful piece," Edmund observed. "A family heirloom?" "It was my mother's. It's all I have left of her." Amara hesitated, then carefully opened it to show him the photograph. "I don't know who she was, really. Aunt Beatrice never talked about her." Edmund's face went completely pale. He reached for his spectacles, studying the photograph intently. "My dear girl," he whispered, "where exactly did you say you came from?" That night, Edmund disappeared into his study, emerging hours later with armloads of books, newspapers, and official documents. Amara found him at breakfast, his eyes red from lack of sleep, but bright with excitement. "Amara, I need you to tell me everything you know about your family." Everything. She told him what little she knew. Her mother had died when she was very young. There had been some kind of accident, and she'd been raised by a woman who claimed to be her mother's friend before being passed to Aunt Beatrice after that woman's death. Edmund listened intently, then opened one of his books to a specific page. It was a history of the royal family of Astoria, the neighboring kingdom. There, in a formal portrait, was a woman who looked exactly like the photograph in Amara's locket, but this woman wore an elaborate crown and royal regalia. "This is Queen Isabella of Astoria," Edmund said quietly. "She died 16 years ago in a palace fire that also claimed her infant daughter, Princess Amara." The room seemed to spin around them. Amara stared at the page, then at her locket, then back at the page. "That's impossible," she whispered. "Look at this." Edmund showed her another document, a reward notice that had been distributed throughout the kingdoms years earlier. The royal family suspected that Princess Amara might have survived the fire. Someone reported seeing a servant woman fleeing the palace with a baby, but she was never found. With trembling hands, Amara touched the birthmark on her shoulder, the one shaped like a crown that she'd always been self-conscious about. Princess Amara was reportedly born with a distinctive birthmark. Edmund read from the official description. The pieces fell into place like a puzzle solving itself. The servant woman who had raised her, who had always seemed sad and fearful. Her mysterious death when Amara was 13. The locket that was far too valuable for a commoner to own. Even Aunt Beatrice's cruelty made a twisted kind of sense. She'd been caring for royalty, without knowing it, resentful of the burden but unaware of the treasure she possessed. Amara could barely form the words. "I'm a princess?" "Not just any princess," Edmund said gently. "You're the rightful queen of Astoria. The throne has been vacant since your supposed death, with your uncle serving as regent. But you're alive and you're of age to claim your birthright." The revelation hit Amara like a physical blow. For days, she wandered the mansion in a daze, struggling to reconcile her identity as an abused orphan with the reality of being royalty. Edmund gave her space but remained close, ready to support her through the emotional upheaval. "I don't know how to be a queen," she confided one evening as they walked through the gardens. "I don't know anything about ruling a kingdom." "You know more than you think," Edmund replied. "You've experienced poverty, injustice, and cruelty firsthand. That understanding will make you a better ruler than someone who's only known privilege. But what if I'm not worthy? What if the kingdom is better off without me?" Edmund stopped walking and turned to face her. "My dear girl, you've survived years of abuse with your kindness intact. You've educated yourself despite every obstacle. You maintained hope when anyone else would have despaired. If that doesn't qualify someone for leadership, I don't know what does." As the days passed, Amara began to understand the magnitude of what lay before her. Astoria was struggling under her uncle's weak leadership. The people were overtaxed, the nobles were corrupt, and the kingdom's infrastructure was crumbling. But with her return, there was hope for change. Edmund became her teacher and advisor, sharing everything he knew about politics, economics, and leadership. Amara absorbed it all with the same hunger she'd shown for literature, finally understanding why she'd always felt destined for something greater. But first, there was someone she needed to confront. The journey back to Millbrook felt like traveling to another world. Amara rode in Edmund's finest carriage, wearing clothes befitting her station, but her heart pounded with each mile. She had documents proving her identity, witnesses willing to testify, and enough evidence to convince even the most skeptical observer. But more than proof, she carried a decision she'd wrestled with for weeks. The cottage looked even smaller and shabbier than she remembered. Beatrice was in the garden, pulling weeds and muttering complaints, when the grand carriage rolled to a stop. She looked up, squinting against the sun, clearly wondering what wealthy visitors could possibly want in Millbrook. Then Amara stepped out. Beatrice's face went through a series of expressions: confusion, recognition, shock, and finally, terror. The girl she'd sold off like livestock now stood before her dressed like nobility, accompanied by obvious wealth and power. "Hello, Aunt Beatrice," Amara said quietly. Beatrice's voice cracked. "What are you doing here? Who are these people?" A crowd was gathering. Word spread quickly in small villages, and everyone wanted to see what was happening at the cottage where poor Amara used to live. Edmund stepped forward, his presence commanding immediate respect. "I am Edmund Hawthorne, and I have the honor of presenting Her Royal Majesty, Queen Amara of Astoria." The words hit the crowd like a thunderbolt. Murmurs spread to the gathering. The orphan girl, the one they'd all pitied or ignored, was royalty? It seemed impossible, but the evidence was undeniable. Beatrice fell to her knees, whether from shock or fear. Amara couldn't tell. Please, the older woman whispered. I didn't know. I swear I didn't know who you were. This was the moment Amara had been dreading and anticipating. The moment when she could have her revenge on the woman who had made her life a misery for 3 years. She had the power now to destroy Beatrice completely, to have her imprisoned or worse. Instead, she thought of her mother's photograph, of the kindness in those royal eyes, and of the woman who had died protecting her identity. Stand up, Aunt Beatrice, Amara said firmly. Beatrice rose on shaking legs, unable to meet Amara's eyes. You're right, you didn't know who I was. But that doesn't excuse how you treated me. You saw a frightened, grieving child and chose cruelty over compassion. You sold me to a stranger without caring about my safety or well-being. The crowd murmured agreement. Many of them were remembering their own silence, their failure to help when they could have. However, Amara continued, her voice carrying clearly across the gathered villagers, I've learned something important during my time away. Revenge only creates more pain. Cruelty breeds cruelty. If I'm to be a queen worthy of my mother's memory, I must choose a different path. She stepped closer to Beatrice, her voice gentle but firm. You will not be imprisoned or punished by royal decree. Instead, you will work with the new orphanages and shelters I'm establishing throughout the kingdom. You will care for children who have no one else. And perhaps in doing so, you'll learn compassion you failed to show me. Beatrice's eyes filled with tears, whether relief or shame. Amara couldn't tell. As for this village, Amara turned to address the crowd. I haven't forgotten that I lived here in poverty, while you looked the other way. But I've also learned that poverty makes people desperate, and desperation makes them cruel. That will change now. The journey to Astoria's capital took 2 weeks, but word of Princess Amara's return traveled faster than any carriage. By the time they reached the palace gates, thousands of people lined the streets, desperate to see the lost princess who had returned to save their kingdom. Amara's uncle, Regent Marcus, had little choice but to acknowledge her claim. The evidence was overwhelming, and the people's support was obvious. In a private ceremony, he handed over the crown that had been held in trust for 16 years. I'm sorry for what you've endured, he said quietly. If we had known you were alive. The past cannot be changed, Amara replied, accepting the crown with steady hands. But the future can be. Her coronation was a celebration unlike any the kingdom had seen in decades. But Amara's first royal decree was not about ceremony or pageantry. It was about forgotten and neglected children of her realm. Every child in Astoria will have food, shelter, and education, she proclaimed from the palace balcony. No child will be sold, traded, or treated as property. And anyone who harms a child under my protection will face the full weight of royal justice. The crowd's cheers could be heard for miles. Edmund became her chief advisor, his wisdom and experience invaluable as she navigated the complex world of royal politics. Under their leadership, Astoria began to flourish. Roads were repaired, schools were built, and corruption was rooted out with determined efficiency. But perhaps the most remarkable change was in Beatrice herself. Working daily with orphaned and abandoned children, she began to understand the magnitude of what she'd done to Amara. Her letters to the Queen were filled with genuine remorse and reports of the good work being done at the shelters. I was wrong about so many things, she wrote. But mostly I was wrong about you. You were never the worthless creature I claimed you were. You were a queen, even when you slept in my attic. 5 years later, Queen Amara returned to Millbrook for the opening of a new school and orphanage. The village had been transformed, prosperity had returned. Children played safely in clean streets, and the sense of hopelessness that had once pervaded everything was gone. Beatrice met her at the school's entrance, but she was not the bitter, cruel woman Amara remembered. Years of caring for vulnerable children had softened her edges and opened her heart. She was still stern, but it was a sternness of protective guardian rather than a tyrant. Your Majesty, she said formally, then hesitated. Amara, I know I can never undo the harm I caused you, but I want you to know that every child I've helped, every life I've touched for better, I've done in your honor, not because you commanded it, but because you deserved so much better than what I gave you. Amara smiled, and for a moment, she was simply a young woman talking to the aunt who had raised her, however poorly. We all deserve better, Aunt Beatrice. But we also all deserve the chance to become better. That's what second chances are for. As she toured the facilities, Amara saw children who reminded her of herself lost, afraid, but not without hope. She knelt down to speak with a little girl who clutched a worn doll, just as Amara had once clutched her mother's locket. "What's your name, sweetheart?" "Emma, Your Majesty. I don't have a family anymore." "Then you're exactly where you belong," Amara said gently. "Because family isn't just about blood. It's about people who choose to love and protect you. And you have lots of family here." That evening, as her carriage prepared to return to the capital, Amara took one last look at the cottage where her royal journey had begun. The building stood empty now Beatrice lived at the orphanage, dedicating her remaining years to service. Edmund, now in his 70s but still sharp as ever, joined her at the window. "Any regrets?" he asked. "None," Amara replied firmly. "Every moment of suffering led me to this. Every act of cruelty taught me the value of kindness. I wouldn't change any of it." "Even Beatrice?" Amara considered this. "Especially Beatrice. She taught me that people can change, that redemption is possible, and that sometimes the greatest transformations come from the greatest pain." As they rode through the night toward the capital, Amara touched a locket that still hung around her neck. Inside was no longer just her mother's photograph, but also a small portrait of Edmund and a pressed flower from the first garden she'd ever been allowed to enjoy freely. She had learned that identity wasn't about birth or bloodline, but about the choices you make and the love you choose to give. She had been a queen long before she wore a crown. In her resilience, her compassion, and her refusal to let cruelty turn her cruel. Asterisk as we reach the end of Amara's incredible journey. Take a moment to think about the people in your own life. That quiet person in the corner, the one who serves your coffee, the child who seems invisible. Do you really know who they are? Do you see their potential, their dreams, their hidden strength? Asterisk. Amara's story reminds us that greatness isn't always obvious. Sometimes it's hidden behind poverty, behind pain, behind circumstances that make us want to look away. But every person you meet carries within them the capacity for extraordinary things. Asterisk the next time you encounter someone who seems powerless, remember Queen Amara. Remember that the person you dismiss today might be the leader you need tomorrow. Remember that kindness costs nothing, but can change everything. Asterisk most importantly, remember that you, too, might be carrying more power than you realize. Your circumstances don't define your potential. Your past doesn't limit your future. And sometimes the greatest transformations come from the most unlikely places. Asterisk like Queen Amara, you have the power to choose kindness over cruelty, hope over despair, and forgiveness over revenge. The question is, what will you choose? Asterisk. If this story touched your heart and made you think differently about the people around you, hit that like button. Share in the comments below. Have you ever discovered something unexpected about someone you thought you knew? And don't forget to subscribe for more incredible stories of transformation, hope, and the amazing power of the human spirit. Asterisk. Remember, every person has a story. Every story matters. And sometimes the most extraordinary tales come from the most ordinary places. Asterisk.